Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be invisible to someone who controls everything around you, and then suddenly, one day, they can't stop noticing you? I never thought it would happen to me. I never thought he, Alexander Voss, the billionaire who ran the city's most powerful investment empire, would ever see me as anything more than a shadow passing through his skyscraper halls. Yet, somehow, he did. And when it happened, nothing in my carefully measured life could have prepared me for the chaos it unleashed. The first time I met him, I was late. Of course, I was late. I had spent the morning sprinting across the glass and steel labyrinth of downtown, dodging taxis, the wind tugging at my coat like it had a personal vendetta against me. By the time I reached the revolving doors of Voss Industries, my heart was hammering like it wanted to escape my chest. I had an important pitch to deliver, one that could finally put me on the map in a world that had a way of crushing anyone who dared to dream too loudly. He was waiting, not in a chair, not behind a desk. He was standing, hands casually in his pockets, framed by the enormous panoramic windows that made the office feel like it was suspended above the clouds. And yet, it wasn't the height of the building or the sheen of his tailored suit that made my stomach twist. It was him, Alexander Voss, the man who could buy and sell entire cities with a flick of his pen, the man whose reputation for ruthlessness was legendary. He wasn't looking at the city or the skyline, he was looking at me. And for a moment, I thought he might actually see me. I coughed a tiny, pathetic noise that made me feel 10 years younger. I'm here for the quarterly pitch, I said, clutching my briefcase like it was a lifeline. He smiled. And it wasn't the polite, rehearsed smile you see in boardrooms. It was something different, something that felt almost curious. I know why you're here, he said, but first, tell me something. What makes you think you're ready to be seen in my world? I froze that question. It was more than a question. It was a challenge. It was a gauntlet thrown at my feet, and somehow, I knew my answer would change everything. I wanted to say something clever, something memorable, but all that came out was, I have to try. He nodded slowly, almost approvingly, and for reasons I still don't understand, he let me in. That day, I walked into the boardroom thinking it was just another meeting, just another chance to prove myself. But by the end of the hour, I realized I was no longer just pitching numbers or strategies. I was inside his attention, inside a space that no one else ever seemed to enter. It didn't happen all at once. No, it was subtle at first. A lingering glance across a crowded room, a pause in a conversation, just long enough to make me question if I'd imagined it. An unexpected compliment on something I hadn't even considered important. He began to notice the way I spoke, the way I walked, the way I tilted my head when I was thinking. And the more he noticed, the harder it became for me to maintain the professional distance I had always relied on. I should have been scared, I should have run, but there was something magnetic about him, something dangerous and thrilling that made me forget all my carefully constructed boundaries. He didn't demand attention. He didn't need to. It followed him. And when it touched me, it left me breathless. Weeks passed, and our encounters grew bolder. There were moments when the office felt like a battlefield, charged with attention neither of us acknowledged openly. He would appear where I least expected him, leaning against a doorway with that infuriatingly easy smile, or lingering just long enough near my desk that I could feel the warmth of his presence like sunlight spilling across my skin. I started noticing the little things. How his tie was always slightly crooked by the end of the day. How he tapped his pen when he was deep in thought. How, once, he hesitated before answering a question I asked in a meeting, as if my words had actually mattered to him. The idea that a man who owned fortunes, buildings, and entire networks of influence could be unsettled by me. It was absurd. Yet somehow, it was real. It wasn't just the office. It followed me home. The text messages that appeared late at night, casual enough to seem innocent but loaded with meaning. The coffee delivered to my apartment without explanation. The occasional knock at my door when I wasn't expecting anyone. And there he would be, Alexander Voss, smiling like a man who knew he had won some invisible game. And yet, as much as my heart raced, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I was missing, something beneath the surface of his attention that didn't quite fit the pattern of ordinary attraction. I began to question everything. His motives, my own desires, the dangerous thrill of being seen by someone so untouchable. Then came the night that changed everything. I had stayed late at the office, alone in the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the distant city traffic. I was working on a report, trying desperately to ignore the flutter in my chest that had become impossible to ignore. And then, the door opened. Still working, his voice was low, smooth, and carried that weight, the same weight that made the entire boardroom hold its collective breath whenever he spoke. I jumped, startled, but tried to mask it with a laugh. I just want to finish this before tomorrow. He walked closer, slow, deliberate, like he was savoring each step. I felt the heat of his presence before I saw the expression on his face, something softer, something dangerously intimate, and completely unexpected. Do you ever stop to think that maybe you don't have to do everything alone? I swallowed, unsure whether I should respond. My professional instincts screamed at me to maintain distance. My heart screamed something else entirely. And then, he leaned in slightly, closer than necessary. closer than anyone had ever dared, and whispered, "I think about you more than I should." Time slowed. My pulse thundered in my ears. I felt a strange exhilaration, a thrill that bordered on fear. Alexander Voss, the man who could bend the world to his will, had just admitted that I mattered to him, that my existence, in some small, invisible way, had pierced the armor he wore for the rest of the world. I don't remember what I said. I only remember the heat of the moment, the silent acknowledgement that the dynamic between us had shifted irreversibly. And then, just as suddenly, he was gone, leaving behind only the echo of his words and the lingering scent of expensive cologne. After that night, the office became a maze of unspoken intentions. Meetings, phone calls, casual touches, everything carried an undercurrent of something we both refused to name aloud. I found myself walking a tightrope, balancing my ambition against the dangerous pull of a man who could crush me with a single decision, yet had chosen, inexplicably, to linger in my orbit. I should have resisted. I should have built walls higher than the skyscrapers he owned. But every encounter left me weaker, hungrier, addicted to the subtle power he wielded over me. And he seemed to understand that, playing the game with a precision that was both terrifying and intoxicating. It wasn't just romance, it was a battle of wills. A silent war where each glance, each word, each touch carried weight. And as much as I wanted to stay in control, to maintain the professional distance I had promised myself, I couldn't. And then came the email. A simple, innocuous subject line. "Meet me at the top." My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I knew the building he meant. I knew the floor. I knew exactly what could happen if I accepted, and yet I couldn't stop myself, because deep down, I realized something I hadn't admitted even to myself. I wanted him to notice me. I wanted to cross the line we had both danced around for weeks. I wanted... As I stepped into the elevator, the city stretching out behind me like a glittering ocean of possibilities and danger, I didn't know what awaited. I didn't know if this would be a moment of confession, of temptation, or of ruin. But I did know one thing. Nothing would ever be the same after tonight. The doors opened, revealing the top floor. A space bathed in moonlight and the hum of the city below, and there he was, Alexander Voss, waiting, as if he had known I would come. And in that instant I understood something terrifying and exhilarating. He had been waiting for me too, but as the door slid shut behind me and I stepped into the room that held all the power, all the risk, all the possibility, I had no idea just how far he would go for me, or how much I would risk for him. And that's when I realized, in a world where everything is calculated, where nothing is ever left to chance, love had become the one thing we couldn't control. The city lights stretched out below us like a silent witness. And as he turned to face me, the question that had haunted my every step since the first day I saw him became impossible to ignore. How far would a billionaire go for someone like me? I took a breath, and then he spoke, but what he said next changed everything. "I've been waiting for you," he said, voice low, carrying a weight that made the air itself seem to thicken. His eyes, sharp and calculating as ever, softened in a way that almost broke the steel barrier I had built around myself almost. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the city below, stretching endlessly like veins of light through the night. Moonlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, highlighting the contours of his face. And for a moment, I felt like I had stepped into a different reality, one where the rules of the world outside no longer applied. I started, then faltered, words failing me. Every sentence I had rehearsed evaporated the instant I saw him standing there, as though the air itself conspired to keep me silent. He stepped closer, slow, deliberate. I could feel the warmth radiating from him even across the room. "You don't need to explain," he said softly, almost tenderly. "I already know." A shiver ran down my spine, knowing that single word carried more weight than any declaration I could have imagined. Alexander Voss, a man who had everything, had admitted to seeing me, not as an employee, not as a passerby in his empire, but as me. I swallowed, forcing myself to take a step forward. "Then why me?" He tilted his head slightly, studying me like I was both a puzzle and a revelation. "Because you're not like anyone else. You don't play the game to win. You play because you care about what matters. That is rare, rare." The word echoed in my mind, and I realized that I had spent my entire life thinking I needed to be extraordinary to be noticed. But he didn't want extraordinary. He wanted real, vulnerable, human. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. The hum of the city, the glow of the screens in the office below, even the elevator I had taken to reach this floor, all of it faded into a blur. And I saw him, not as a billionaire, not as a legend in the financial world, but as a man who, for reasons I couldn't yet comprehend, wanted to be close to me. And then, suddenly, the silence broke. His phone buzzed, sharp and intrusive, shattering the fragile bubble we had created. He glanced at it briefly, and the expression on his face shifted just for a second from tenderness to calculation. I saw the edge of the man who controlled everything, who never allowed chaos into his carefully curated life. "I have to take this," he murmured, pocketing the device. "But," he paused, turning back to me. "Don't move." I nodded, though my curiosity was already mounting like a storm inside me. Alone in that moonlit room, I felt exposed, like every heartbeat was amplified, every thought audible, And in that moment, I understood something dangerous. Alexander Voss had pulled me into his orbit, and there was no simple escape. The minutes stretched. I traced the skyline with my eyes, watching the city breathe beneath me. Streetlights flickered like scattered stars, and I felt an almost cinematic irony out there. People were living their ordinary lives oblivious to the storm building above them. And above, I was entangled in a storm I didn't fully understand, yet couldn't resist. When he returned, the air had shifted. His usual calm precision seemed tempered by an edge I hadn't seen before. He moved toward me slower this time, his gaze scanning my face for something I couldn't name. "I need to show you something," he said, almost as if testing whether I would follow him. I did. He led me through the suite, past the minimalistic luxury that screamed wealth without ostentation, until we reached a private balcony. The wind tugged at my coat, but I barely noticed, lost in the gravity of his presence. He turned to me, leaning against the railing, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "I've spent my life controlling everything," he began, voice distant yet intense. "People, markets, deals, even emotions. I thought I could manage it all, until he trailed off, eyes never leaving mine. Until you walked in. I wanted to speak, to protest, but the words lodged in my throat. He wasn't just confessing attraction, he was confessing disruption. My existence had shaken the foundations of the man who had built his world on certainty, and then he reached for my hand. The contact was brief, yet the electricity it carried made my knees weak. "I don't know what this is going to become," he admitted, voice dropping to a whisper, "but I can't pretend I don't feel it." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. There were boundaries, rules, the office, politics, the gossip, the impossible balance between personal and professional. Yet in that moment, none of it seemed real. The only reality was the warmth of his hand, the intensity of his gaze, and the undeniable pull between us. Days turned into weeks, and the tension escalated. Every interaction became a dance on the edge of revelation. Meetings were punctuated by fleeting touches, a brush of fingers, a shared glance that left me dizzy with anticipation. And each evening, the city skyline reminded me that we were playing a dangerous game. One misstep could shatter everything. It wasn't just desire that complicated matters. Alexander Voss had secret layers of life that even the media couldn't penetrate. I began noticing little hints, the cryptic phone calls he took behind closed doors, the sudden trips to undisclosed locations, the way he sometimes stared at me with a mixture of longing and calculation. There was danger in his world, and by stepping closer to him I had invited myself into it. One night, he invited me to a private dinner at a hidden rooftop restaurant, one of those places where the city's chaos seemed distant and inconsequential. The atmosphere was intimate, candles flickering against the glass walls, casting long, trembling shadows. As we sat across from each other, the tension was palpable, almost cinematic in its intensity. "You're different from anyone I've ever met," he said, eyes glinting with something between admiration and challenge. "Most people would be overwhelmed by what I am, what I have. You're not afraid. You step into it, fully, without hesitation." I studied him in the candlelight, noticing the slight crease near his eyes, the way his jaw tensed ever so slightly when he was uncertain. It was the first time I saw cracks in the armor he wore so meticulously for the world, and in that moment, I realized that our connection wasn't just passionate, it was a collision of worlds, a confrontation with vulnerability neither of us had fully prepared for. The conversation shifted seamlessly from trivial topics to deeper, uncharted territory. He spoke of his childhood, of expectations, of the loneliness that had always lingered behind the glamour and wealth. I found myself sharing things I had never told anyone, the quiet fears, the moments of doubt, the yearning for something real in a world obsessed with power and appearances. It was intoxicating, dangerous, and profoundly human. By the time dessert arrived, the city below had fallen into a quiet glow, as if watching silently from afar. And just when I thought the night couldn't become more surreal, his hand reached across the table, and our fingers intertwined. "I don't know what the future holds," he whispered, "but I know I want you in it." Somehow, somewhere, I felt a rush of emotions, fear, longing, exhilaration, all tangled together, impossible to separate. And as the wind swept across the rooftop, carrying the faint scent of rain and asphalt, I understood something fundamental. I had already crossed the line. There was no turning back. The following days were a blur of stolen moments and whispered confessions. Lunches in hidden corners of the city, late-night meetings that weren't really about work, subtle touches that sent sparks through my veins. And yet, with every stolen moment, the stakes grew higher. I couldn't ignore the fact that Voss Industries was a kingdom built on precision, secrecy, and ruthless control, and by entangling myself with its ruler, I had entered a game that could consume me entirely. Then came the first real test. A merger, months in the making, suddenly teetering on the edge of collapse. I was pulled into the negotiation, working alongside Alexander. I saw a new side of him emerge, the strategist, the negotiator, the man whose reputation was forged in battles most people couldn't comprehend. And through it all, he watched me, not with the cool calculation he reserved for business, but with that same rare, intense attention he had shown from the beginning. When the deal finally closed, successfully against odds no one believed possible. He pulled me aside. "You were incredible," he said, voice low and intimate, as though our proximity made words unnecessary. "I don't just mean in the meeting, I mean here." He tapped his chest lightly. "You made me feel things I haven't felt in years." The confession left me stunned. I wanted to speak, to acknowledge the gravity of it, but the words dissolved in my throat. Instead, I simply nodded, my own heart threatening to give me away. That night, as I left the office, the city lights stretched endlessly below me, a reminder that the world continued to turn, indifferent to the private storm raging above. And as I walked through the streets, I realized the truth I had been avoiding. I wasn't just involved with Alexander Voss. I was entwined in a story far larger than myself, a story of power, desire, risk, and the fragile, perilous beauty of being truly seen by someone who could change your life forever. But the deeper I fell, the more I began to notice the subtle signs of tension that had been creeping into our relationship. Small things, a glance that lingered too long in public, a phone call cut short, a meeting that lasted late into the night where his eyes were shadowed with concern. Something was coming, something neither of us could have anticipated, and for the first time I realized that my desire to be close to him was no longer the only danger. I was about to be caught in a storm that might consume us both. The final realization hit me in the quiet of my apartment, the night sky above my window glowing with the soft luminescence of the city. I was in love. Terrifyingly, irrevocably, dangerously in love. And I knew, with a certainty that shook me to my core, that love with Alexander Voss was never simple. It never could be, because the next move wasn't mine to make. And just as I sat there, heart pounding, the phone rang. The name on the screen made my stomach drop, and in that moment, I understood the magnitude of what was coming. This was no longer just a story of attraction. This was the beginning of a battle that could change everything I thought I knew about him, and about myself. The phone call came at a time when the city was at its quietest, the streets slick with the aftermath of rain, streetlights reflecting like molten gold on asphalt. I had been sitting at my desk, the apartment dimly lit, staring at the skyline as if it could offer answers I didn't yet have. When Alexander's name appeared on the screen, a mix of dread and anticipation twisted my stomach into knots. I hesitated before answering, my thumb hovering over the green button, aware that the next words could tip the delicate balance between desire and danger. "Something's come up," he said immediately, his voice low, tight with urgency. "I need you at the office. Now," I repeated, and I could hear the tension crackling behind a single word. He didn't answer, just hung up. My pulse spiked. There was no time to think. The city outside blurred past me as I hailed a cab, the night wind whipping against my coat, making me shiver. Though I could tell it wasn't the cold that unsettled me. Something was wrong. I didn't know what, but every instinct I had honed over months of navigating his unpredictable world screamed at me to be careful. When I arrived, the lobby was empty, the usual hum of security personnel absent. The elevator ride up was silent, and each floor that ticked past felt like a countdown toward an unknown climax. I stepped out onto the top floor and froze. The office lights were dimmed, shadows stretching long and distorted across the open space. And there he was, Alexander, standing near the panoramic windows, his back to me, staring down at the city. The air was heavy with unspoken tension. "You came," he said without turning. His voice held something fragile beneath its usual authority, a tremor that made the room feel different, more human, more intimate, yet heavier with unsaid truths. "What's going on?" I asked, stepping closer, the click of my heels echoing faintly against the polished floor. He turned then, and I saw it. His eyes, normally so impenetrable, were dark, stormy, almost haunted. There was a flicker of something I had never seen before. "Fear. They're coming for me," he said, and my stomach dropped. "Not the kind of people you can negotiate with, or charm, or buy off. They know about the merger, about my plans, about us. My voice trembled, though I tried to mask it with strength I didn't feel. He nodded, running a hand through his hair. "I thought I could protect this. Protect you. But I've underestimated how far they'll go." His gaze softened, and for a moment, he looked almost vulnerable. The kind of vulnerability he only allowed himself when he thought no one was watching. "I need you to trust me. I need you to be careful." The words hung between us like a physical weight. The man who controlled everything had asked me for trust me, and I realized that I wasn't just involved with Alexander Voss. I was now entangled in a world that pulsed with danger and power beyond my comprehension. Then the sound came, the faint click of the security door, almost imperceptible, but I recognized it instantly. Someone else was in the office. My heart hammered against my ribs as I instinctively moved closer to him, shadowed by the dim light. The room seemed to contract around us, suffocating and electric at the same time. A figure stepped out of the shadows, and suddenly everything became impossible. It wasn't just an intruder, it was someone I knew, someone I trusted. Marla, his assistant, her expression unreadable, sharp. "Alex," she said softly, almost apologetically, "we don't have much time." "What's happening?" I asked, my voice catching panic clawing at my chest. Marla's eyes flicked to me, and in that brief glance I understood. She was a gatekeeper, a protector, and maybe more loyal than anyone could ever expect. "There's information leaked," she said, urgency tightening her tone. "Someone's targeting your assets, your partners, and you." Her gaze lingered on me, loaded with a silent warning. "And anyone close to you is at risk. You need to leave." Alexander's hand found mine, gripping it with a force that spoke of both reassurance and command. "Not without you," he said. The air was charged with a tension that left my pulse racing. I could feel the weight of the moment, the stakes suddenly and terrifyingly high. We moved through the office in silence, shadows stretching across the floor as he led me to a private service elevator. Every step echoed against the walls, a soundtrack of impending chaos. The elevator doors slid shut, enclosing us in a narrow metallic box. The hum of machinery, a reminder of the outside world. We were about to re-enter an outside world that had shifted from distant threat to immediate danger. Alexander leaned against the wall, his gaze fixed on me. "You need to understand something," he said, voice low, almost a whisper. "Being close to me isn't safe. It's never been safe. And now, it's worse if they find you. I can't promise anything." The weight of his words crashed over me. Fear, yes, but also a wild, reckless adrenaline that made my skin tingle. I was no stranger to risk, but this was different. This wasn't just about ambition or survival. This was about us, about the fragile, dangerous thread connecting to people in a world where one misstep could destroy everything. The elevator jolted, the lights flickering, and for a moment, the metallic walls seemed to close in. And then, abruptly, the doors opened onto a floor that was deserted, eerily silent except for the distant hum of the city. Alexander led the way, eyes scanning the corridor, every muscle taut, every movement calculated, and I realized how little I actually knew about Himalayas, the secrets, the battles fought behind the glimmering surface of wealth and influence. We reached a service exit that led to a fire escape, and the night air hit me like a shock. Rain had started again, slicking the metal stairs, drenching us almost immediately. I shivered, but not from the cold. This was pure, unfiltered tension, the kind that sears itself into memory. Alexander kept one hand on the railing, the other brushing against mine, guiding me downward, each step a beat in a symphony of fear and anticipation. "Who are they?" I finally asked, voice tight, almost breaking under the weight of it all. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned the horizon, alert to every sound, every shadow. "They're people who want control," he finally said, tone clipped, almost detached. "People who won't stop until they have everything I've built, and now you're in the crosshairs too." I stopped, gripping the railing, letting the gravity of his words sink in. "Why me?" I asked, though the answer was terrifyingly clear. Being close to Alexander wasn't just intimate, it was dangerous. Being seen by him had dragged me into a world where power and desire collided violently. He turned to me then, faced half-lit by the neon glow of the city below. "Because you matter. Because I can't let them take you. Because," his words faltered, caught somewhere between fear and confession. "Because I've realized I can't lose you. Not now, not ever." The intensity of it nearly knocked me off balance. His vulnerability was a weapon in itself, and I felt it in every nerve, every heartbeat. And then, as if confirming the reality of the threat, a loud metallic clang echoed from below. Someone was following us. Someone had tracked us to the fire escape. Alexander moved swiftly, guiding me down the stairs 2 at a time, his hand firm on my back. My heart pounded so hard it felt as though it would escape my chest. The city, once a breathtaking panorama of lights and opportunity, now felt like a labyrinth of shadows. Every turn a potential trap. We reached the street, and the wind ripped through my hair, rain blurring the neon reflections into streaks of color across the pavement. Alexander pulled me close, scanning the alleys, the rooftops, the silhouettes of passing cars. "We're not safe yet," he said, urgency slicing through his usual calm. In that moment, something shifted in me. Fear mingled with exhilaration, with a reckless clarity. This wasn't just danger, it was revelation. I realized that my feelings for him had evolved beyond desire or fascination. I had become part of his world in a way that was irreversible, intimate, and terrifying. And I understood, with bone-deep certainty, that my life and my heart would never be the same. A sudden movement in the shadows made us both tense. Alexander's hand went to his coat, the edge of a concealed weapon just visible. The rain intensified, drumming against us in sharp, relentless beats. And then I saw it, a figure stepping from the darkness, a silhouette that made my blood run cold. It wasn't a stranger. It was someone I had trusted, someone whose loyalty I had never doubted, until now. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Betrayal was no longer theoretically, it was standing before us, deliberate, calculated, and armed. Alexander tightened his grip on my hand, pulling me behind him, his eyes scanning for the fastest escape. My mind raced, heart hammering in tandem with the city's pulse. As the truth crystallized in my chest, the danger wasn't coming from outside alone. It was already inside, and whatever this person wanted, it wasn't just my life, it was the fragile bond we had built. The thing that had brought me so close to a man who could destroy or save everything with a single choice. Rain-soaked and breathless, adrenaline thrumming through every vein. I realized that the next move would define everything, not just our survival but our connection, our trust, and the reality of being seen, truly seen, in a world where that could be a death sentence. And as the figure stepped closer, the city lights casting a distorted shadow across their face, I understood the magnitude of the moment. This wasn't just a fight for safety, it was a fight for the fragile, complicated truth of us. And in that instant I knew, nothing would ever be the same again. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening like mirrors under the city lights. The chaos that had erupted earlier now felt like a distant echo, a storm that had passed and left a strangely still world in its wake. I sat on the edge of a rooftop, Alexander beside me, the skyline stretching endlessly before us, breathing silently through the night. There was no urgency now, no pounding adrenaline or lurking danger, only the quiet, fragile pause that comes after surviving something that seemed impossible. Alexander leaned back against the railing, the soft glow of neon reflecting across his face, making the lines of his expression softer, almost human. I could see the weight of everything we had faced etched into his features, yet there was something lighter there, too, like a man who had finally glimpsed the truth he had long avoided. "You held your own tonight," he said quietly, almost to himself. Then he turned to me, eyes searching, intense, vulnerable. "I didn't think anyone could. Not like that." I laughed softly, a sound that felt foreign in the quiet but strangely fitting. "I wasn't sure I could either," I admitted, "but somehow, we made it through." He nodded, but the gesture wasn't triumphant, it was reflective, almost solemn. "We did, and I realized something important," he said, voice low, thoughtful. "Control, power, strategy, they matter, yes, but they aren't everything. There's a weight to life that I've ignored for far too long. Connection, trust, vulnerability. You've shown me that even someone like me can still be human." I stared at him, feeling the truth in his words like a tide washing over me. I had never seen him so exposed, so undeniably real. The man who could command empires, manipulate markets, and bend the world to his will had admitted that what mattered most couldn't be calculated, bought, or controlled. "And you?" he asked, suddenly, turning his gaze toward me. "Do you feel the same?" I hesitated, the truth of it settling slowly, achingly. "I do," I whispered, more than I ever expected, or wanted to admit. I thought I needed to stay careful, to protect myself, but being close to you, it made me see things differently, made me see myself differently. He nodded, a soft, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The city sprawled beneath us, each flickering light a reminder that life continued, oblivious to the storm we had endured. Yet in that moment, it felt like the city belonged to us alone, our survival, our connection, our fragile triumph over the chaos that had threatened to consume us. We sat in silence, letting the night stretch between us. I could feel his hand brush against mine, tentative at first, then more deliberately, until our fingers intertwined, the contact steady and grounding. And in that simple touch, I understood something profound. The world could be uncertain, perilous, and unpredictable. But in moments like these, with someone who truly saw you, it became bearable, beautiful even. The memories of the last few weeks, the whispered confessions, the dangerous encounters, the moments of fear and exhilaration faded into clarity. I could see them now as part of a larger tapestry, each thread necessary to reach this point. The challenges, the betrayals, the tests of courage, they hadn't just shaped us, they had revealed us, stripped us down to the core of what mattered. And what mattered, in the end, wasn't power or ambition. It was the willingness to be seen, to trust, to embrace the fragile, fleeting beauty of connection. Alexander's voice broke through my thoughts, calm but resonant. "I never thought I'd risk this," he admitted, gesturing vaguely to the world below, to the empire he had built, to the life he had meticulously controlled. "I never thought I'd let someone in. Not like this, and now I can't imagine life without it. Without you." The words hit me like a wave, and I felt a warmth spread through me. A mixture of relief, recognition, and something deeper that I didn't yet have a name for. This wasn't just attraction or infatuation, it was the recognition of shared humanity, of vulnerability met with understanding, of the rare courage to let someone in fully, without pretense. I realized then that the story of Alexander Voss and me was never just about power or desire. It had been about learning to see and be seen without the shields and masks that life demanded, about understanding that even in a world of calculation and control, the moments that truly define us are often the ones we cannot command. We stayed there long into the night, talking in whispers, sharing stories we had never shared with anyone else. Laughter mingled with quiet reflection, confessions of fears long buried, and acknowledgement of the mistakes and choices that had brought us here. Every word, every glance, every touch reinforced the fragile trust we had built, not just in each other, but in ourselves, in the capacity to face the unknown and still emerge intact. And yet, amid the calm, a quiet question lingered, unspoken but insistent. We had survived the storm, navigated the danger, confronted the betrayals, but what came next? Could we truly exist in a world that demanded we remain cautious, strategic, aware of every shadow? Could connections survive when the stakes were so high, when the forces that had threatened us were still out there, waiting? I turned my gaze back to the city, its lights shimmering like fragments of hope in the darkness. The answer wasn't simple, wasn't immediate, but in that moment, I understood something essential. Life, like love, isn't about certainty. It's about the courage to continue, to embrace the unknown, to find beauty and meaning even when the world insists on chaos. Alexander's hand tightened around mine. "We can face it," he said softly, not as a promise of invulnerability, but as a recognition of resilience. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." I nodded, letting his words sink into the quiet corners of my mind, the weight of the world momentarily lifting. And for the first time in weeks, I felt truly unburdened. Aware that survival was no longer just about avoiding danger, it was about recognizing the rare, fleeting moments that made life worth the risk. The night stretched on, the city quiet except for the distant hum of life. I leaned my head on his shoulder, feeling the subtle rise and fall of his breath. The steady presence of someone who had once been untouchable but was now, in this fragile space, profoundly real. And I realized, with a clarity that brought both peace and wonder, that the most extraordinary power a person could wield was not control over the world, but the courage to be seen, to care, and to trust. As the first hints of dawn brushed the horizon, painting the sky in pale, tentative colors, I let myself reflect on the journey that had brought us here. From the first moment he had noticed me, to the storms we had endured, to the confessions whispered in the quiet glow of the city, it all felt like a revelation. Life was unpredictable, messy, and often terrifying, but it was also luminous, rich, and full of possibility for those who dared to truly connect. I thought of the question that had haunted me from the very beginning. How far would a billionaire go for someone like me? Now, I understood that the answer wasn't measured in wealth or influence, in control or power. It was measured in presence, in choice, in the willingness to open oneself to the unknown, to risk everything for the fleeting, extraordinary possibility of love and connection. And I realized something else. Perhaps that's the real challenge for all of us, not the storms that rage around us, not the obstacles and betrayals, but the quiet, profound question of whether we are brave enough to be seen, brave enough to trust, brave enough to surrender to the uncertainty that makes life and love simultaneously terrifying and miraculous. The city woke slowly below us, lights shifting, streets stirring, the hum of life returning. We remained on the rooftop, silent, connected, watching the dawn break, knowing that while nothing in the world was guaranteed, this moment was ours. The storm had passed, the danger had subsided, at least for now. And in its wake, what remained was something far more enduring than fear, a fragile, luminous hope. I looked at Alexander, and I asked myself, not for the first time, and perhaps not for the last, if being seen like this could change the course of our lives. Could it change us in ways we weren't yet ready to understand? Could we survive fully, not just in safety, but in truth, in connection, in love? And as the sunlight touched the glass of the city, gilding the skyline in soft amber, I knew that the answer, like life itself, would unfold slowly, beautifully, and unpredictably. Because in the end, what we carry forward is not the storm, not the danger, not the wealth or the power. It is the choice to be present, to be seen, to let the quiet moments of courage, trust, and vulnerability define us, even when the world demands otherwise. And for the first time in my life, I understood that was the most extraordinary journey of all.